So basically, I'm on the side where survey saying Brooklyn. They was like looking over there. It's like, oh, that's pretty cool. We should go over there, build some land. So that's when they built the Cromwell family and a couple other people built up the Potato Land and Company. And yeah, they start laying out the plans for Brooklyn. This is Hanover Street Bridge, y'all. So it was the long bridge was built before Hanover Street Bridge. The Hanover Street Bridge wasn't built until 1916. The long bridge was built 1856, and they said that the long bridge wasn't right here. It was over, leading from Light Street all the way to Brooklyn, and they said with wood. So basically it was like they had really like got into the water and shoved logs into the mud to make the bridge work. Yeah, and it wasn't no cars at the time. It was just horse and wagons. So, and they was just walking.
I'm KennyCaptures, and welcome back to
History Through My Lens, Episode 5. I'm KennyCaptures, and welcome back to History Through My Lens. In our last episodes, we explored what this land looked like before 1853. We journeyed through its earliest history, from dense forests and the people who first called this land home, to the arrival of European settlers, the growth of farms, and the transformation of the landscape along the Patapsco River. By 1853, that transformation reached a turning point. The village of Brooklyn was officially laid out, marking the beginning of a new chapter in the history of South Baltimore. But a village doesn't build itself. Who imagined Brooklyn before it existed? Who surveyed the land and planned its streets? Who invested in its future? Who built its homes, businesses, and bridges? And who performed the hard labor, often without recognition, that turned those plans into reality? The story of Brooklyn wasn't written by one person alone. It was shaped by landowners and developers, by free black residents and enslaved African Americans before emancipation, by immigrants seeking new opportunities, and by skilled workers whose names were rarely recorded in history books. Together, they laid the foundation for a neighborhood that would continue to grow through industry, transportation, and the changing tides of American history. Today, we're exploring the people who helped shape early Brooklyn, and how their work transformed a young community into one of the most important industrial neighborhoods along the Patapsco River. Let's begin. Before a single house was built, before streets had names, before Brooklyn became the community we know today, someone had to imagine what this place could become. In 1853, local investors and landowners came together with an ambitious vision to transform this quiet rural peninsula in northern Anne Arundel County into a planned village that could grow alongside the expanding city of Baltimore. Working with surveyors, they carefully measured the land, divided former farmland into home sites and commercial lots, and laid out the original street plan for what would become the village of Brooklyn. Their vision was driven by more than just land. They recognized the area's unique location along the Patapsco River. With access to the water, nearby farmland, and close connections to Baltimore's growing harbor, they believed this small village had the potential to become a thriving community for families, workers, merchants, and future industries. On paper, the foundation of Brooklyn had been laid. But maps alone could not build a community. The land still needed to be prepared. Homes had to be constructed. Roads had to be improved. And perhaps most importantly, Brooklyn needed a dependable connection to Baltimore. That challenge would lead to one of the most important engineering projects in the village's early history, the Long Bridge.
They said that the Long Bridge was from over there where Light Street was, going through the Patapsco River, leading all the way to Brooklyn. Oh, look at this crab, y'all. I don't know if y'all can see it. Dang.
Although the village of Brooklyn had been laid out in 1853, one major obstacle still stood in the way of its future: transportation. The middle branch of the Patapsco River separated the young village from the growing city of Baltimore. While the river was vital for trade and travel, it also made crossing between the two communities slow, expensive, and often unpredictable. Before a permanent bridge existed, residents relied on ferries, rowboats, and small sailing vessels to cross the water. Farmers waited to transport their crops to Baltimore's markets. Merchants delayed shipments of lumber, brick, and supplies. Families planned their journeys around the weather, the tides, and the availability of a ferry. The river connected people, but it also kept them apart. The leaders behind Brooklyn's development understood that if the village was going to succeed, it needed a dependable overland connection to Baltimore. That connection came in 1856 with the completion of the Long Bridge. Stretching nearly a mile across the middle branch, the bridge extended from the end of Light Street in South Baltimore to Acton's Park in the village of Brooklyn. It became the first permanent overland crossing between the two communities, allowing people to travel by foot, horseback, and horse-drawn wagon without relying on ferries. Building the Long Bridge was one of the region's most ambitious engineering projects of its time. Engineers first surveyed the marshy shoreline to determine the safest route across the river. Workers then drove hundreds of massive wooden piles deep into the soft riverbed to create a stable foundation. Heavy timber beams were secured with hand-forged iron bolts and braces, while thick wooden planks formed the roadway above. Near the center of the bridge, builders included a movable draw span that could be opened to allow schooners, sailing ships, and commercial vessels to continue traveling along the Patapsco River into Baltimore Harbor. Construction demanded months of difficult labor. Workers battled deep mud, changing tides, high winds, freezing winters, and the constant challenge of moving enormous timbers into place using the tools and equipment available in the mid-1800s. The names of many of the men who built the bridge have been lost to history. Historical records preserve information about some of the landowners and developers who helped shape early Brooklyn, but they rarely identify the carpenters, blacksmiths, timber workers and laborers whose craftsmanship made the bridge possible. Maryland was still a slave state in 1856. Enslaved African Americans worked throughout the region in agriculture, timber operations, and construction. While no surviving records specifically identify who built the Long Bridge, it is possible that enslaved laborers worked alongside free laborers and skilled craftsmen. Because the historical record is incomplete, we cannot say this with certainty. When the bridge opened, Brooklyn was changed forever. Travel became faster. Trade increased. New families settled in the village. Businesses found new opportunities. What had once been a quiet rural community was now directly connected to one of America's busiest ports. Long before the Hanover Street Bridge, long before automobiles, and long before railroads transformed South Baltimore, there was the Long Bridge. More than a crossing of timber and iron, it became the gateway that helped shape the future of Brooklyn for generations to come. As Brooklyn continued to grow during the late 1850s, it became home to a diverse community of people searching for opportunity. Some were farmers who had worked this land for generations. Others were craftsmen, merchants, laborers, and tradesmen who saw promise in a new village connected to Baltimore by the Long Bridge. Every new home, store, barn, and workshop required skilled hands. Carpenters framed houses from locally cut timber. Brickmakers fired thousands of bricks used for chimneys, foundations, and commercial buildings. Blacksmiths forged horseshoes, wagon parts, tools, nails, hinges, and iron hardware that kept the growing community moving. Masons built stone foundations and chimneys that still stood long after many of the original wooden buildings had disappeared. Wheelwrights and wagon makers built and repaired the wagons that carried crops, lumber, and supplies between Brooklyn and Baltimore. Along the Patapsco River, boat builders, ship carpenters, dock workers, and watermen supported the region's growing maritime economy. Schooners, steamboats, and cargo vessels regularly traveled the harbor, bringing goods, building materials, and passengers through Baltimore's busy port. Brooklyn's location made it an ideal place for both agriculture and commerce. The surrounding farms continued producing corn, wheat, oats, vegetables, fruit, hay, and livestock. Every day, wagons crossed the Long Bridge, carrying fresh produce and other goods to Baltimore's markets, while returning with manufactured products and supplies that could not be produced locally. Among Brooklyn's residents were both free African Americans and enslaved African Americans. By the 1850s, Maryland had one of the largest free black populations in the United States. Many free African Americans lived throughout Baltimore and the surrounding counties, earning a living as carpenters, caulkers, blacksmiths, sailors, domestic workers, laborers, teachers, ministers, and small business owners. Their skills and labor played an important role in the region's economy. At the same time, Maryland remained a slave state. Enslaved African Americans were forced to work on farms, in households, in timber operations, on the waterfront, and in many forms of manual labor. Their work helped build the wealth of others, while they themselves were denied freedom and the basic rights promised to so many Americans. Although history has preserved the names of many landowners and businessmen, the names of countless workers, especially African Americans, both free and enslaved, were never recorded. Yet their labor shaped the roads, homes, businesses, farms, and waterfront that helped Brooklyn grow. By the end of the 1850s, the village of Brooklyn was no longer simply an idea on a surveyor's map. It had become a living community. But as the village continued to grow, the nation itself was beginning to fall apart. A conflict unlike anything America had ever seen was about to change Brooklyn and the entire country forever. Where did African Americans live during this time? The answer depended on whether they were free or enslaved. By the 1850s, Maryland had one of the largest free black populations in the United States. Many free African Americans lived throughout Baltimore and the surrounding countryside, renting or owning modest homes wherever work could be found. Some lived near Baltimore's waterfront, while others settled in rural communities across northern Anne Arundel County and neighboring areas. Many earned a living as boatmen, blacksmiths, carpenters, brickmakers, domestic workers, laborers, and skilled craftsmen. They worked in shipyards, warehouses, workshops, farms, and along the busy Patapsco waterfront. Enslaved African Americans lived very different lives. Most were housed on the farms and estates where they were forced to work. Others lived in small cabins or quarters near timber operations, docks, or the homes of those who enslaved them. Their housing was often simple, overcrowded, and built to serve the needs of the property owners rather than the people forced to live there. Although historical records do not identify a large free black neighborhood within the newly established village of Brooklyn during the 1850s, free and enslaved African Americans were an essential part of the region's workforce. Their labor helped build roads, harvest crops, cut timber, load ships, construct buildings, and support the growing communities surrounding the Patapsco River. Their names may not appear in many history books, but their contributions helped shape the Brooklyn that would continue to grow in the decades ahead. As Brooklyn continued to grow, events far beyond the village were beginning to reshape the nation. Across the United States, tensions over slavery, states' rights, and the future of the country had reached a breaking point. Then, on April 12, 1861, Confederate forces opened fire on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. The American Civil War had begun. Although Maryland remained in the Union, it was one of the nation's border states. Many Marylanders supported the Union, while others sympathized with the Confederacy. Families, friends, and neighbors often found themselves divided by politics, loyalty, and beliefs. Baltimore quickly became one of the Union's most important cities. Its railroads connected the North to Washington, D.C. Its harbor supplied Union forces with food, equipment, coal, and military supplies. Its factories produced machinery, iron products, clothing, and other materials needed to support the war effort. Just across the Middle Branch, Brooklyn felt those changes. Soldiers marched through the region. Steamships crowded the Patapsco River, carrying troops and supplies. Military wagons traveled nearby roads. The sound of whistles, hammers, and ship bells became part of everyday life as Baltimore prepared for war. For the people living in Brooklyn, life continued, but nothing felt quite the same. Farmers still planted their fields. Children still attended school. Boats still crossed the Patapsco. But everyone understood that the nation was at war. For African Americans, the conflict carried an even deeper meaning. Many hoped the war would bring an end to slavery. Some free black Marylanders found ways to support the Union cause, while countless enslaved men and women watched and waited, hoping freedom would finally arrive. After generations of bondage, that hope was growing stronger with each passing year. The war would change the course of American history, and it would forever change the future of Brooklyn. For African Americans living in Maryland, the Civil War carried a special meaning. On January 1, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared freedom for enslaved people in states that were in rebellion against the United States. But there was one important exception. Maryland was a border state that remained in the Union. Because of that, the Emancipation Proclamation did not free enslaved people in Maryland. Thousands of African Americans in communities like Brooklyn and throughout the state remained enslaved. It wasn't until November 1, 1864, that freedom finally came to Maryland. On that day, a new Maryland Constitution took effect, officially abolishing slavery throughout the state. More than a month before the Civil War ended, and more than a year before the 13th Amendment abolished slavery across the entire nation. For thousands of men, women, and children, it marked the beginning of a new chapter. Freedom had finally become the law in Maryland. Then, on April 9, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse, bringing the Civil War to an end. Later that year, on December 6, 1865, the ratification of the 13th Amendment permanently abolished slavery throughout the United States. The war was over. Slavery had ended. And Brooklyn stood at the beginning of a new era, one that would bring industry, immigration, railroads, and dramatic change to the community for generations to come. With the Civil War behind them and slavery abolished in Maryland, the people of Brooklyn entered a period of rapid change. The small village founded in 1853 was beginning to look very different. Many of the open fields that had once produced corn, wheat and hay remained, but new homes were appearing every year. Families settled along the village's growing network of streets, while local businesses opened to serve the expanding population. Brooklyn's greatest advantage was its location. To the north stood the city of Baltimore, one of the busiest ports in the United States. To the south and east stretched the Patapsco River, whose deep waters connected the community to the Chesapeake Bay and beyond. The Long Bridge, completed in 1856, continued to carry people, wagons, livestock and goods across the Middle Branch every day. What had once been a difficult journey by ferry had become a dependable route linking Brooklyn to Baltimore's markets, industries, and waterfront. As the years passed, transportation continued to improve. During the 1870s and 1880s, railroad lines expanded into South Baltimore and toward Curtis Bay, connecting the region to the growing rail network of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Coal from western Maryland, lumber from nearby forests, iron, machinery and manufactured goods. Everything could now move faster than ever before. The railroad transformed the region. New warehouses were built. Wharves grew busier. Industries expanded along the waterfront. Workers arrived looking for steady employment, bringing new cultures, traditions and skills with them. Irish immigrants, German immigrants, free black families, and long-time Maryland residents all helped shape the growing community. Churches welcomed new congregations. Schools educated a new generation of children. Local stores, blacksmith shops and businesses became gathering places where neighbors met and supported one another. Brooklyn was no longer simply a farming village. It was becoming a hard-working community connected to the industries that powered Baltimore's economy. Yet with every passing year, another question became more important. As Baltimore continued to expand beyond its original boundaries, should Brooklyn remain an independent village, or should it become part of the growing city of Baltimore? The answer would come in 1888, and it would forever change the history of Brooklyn. By the late 1870s and into the 1880s, Brooklyn was changing faster than ever before. What had once been a quiet farming village was becoming a community connected by roads, railroads, and the busy waters of the Patapsco River. The Long Bridge continued carrying people and goods between Brooklyn and Baltimore, while new railroad lines expanded farther south toward the harbor. Coal from western Maryland, lumber, iron, machinery, and manufactured goods now moved through the region with greater speed than ever before. The arrival of industry brought opportunity. Workers came from across Maryland and from countries around the world, hoping to build new lives. Churches welcomed growing congregations. Schools educated a new generation. Local businesses expanded to serve a rapidly growing population. As development spread farther south along the Patapsco River, attention turned to another stretch of waterfront. The deep, protected waters surrounding Curtis Bay offered tremendous opportunities for shipping, rail transportation, and heavy industry. Although the community of Curtis Bay had not yet been established, the stage was being set. Within the next decade, railroads would reach the shoreline. Industries would arrive. And in 1890, the town of Curtis Bay would officially be established, becoming one of Maryland's most important industrial communities. But before Curtis Bay could emerge, Brooklyn would experience one of the most important moments in its history.
In 1888, after 35 years as an independent village in Anne Arundel County, Brooklyn would officially become part of the city of Baltimore. Why did that happen? Who supported annexation? And how did becoming part of Baltimore change the lives of the people who called Brooklyn home? Those are the questions we'll answer
in the next episode of History Through My Lens. I'm KennyCaptures. Thank you for joining me as we continue uncovering the untold stories of Baltimore and Maryland. Because every neighborhood has a history, and every story deserves to be remembered. I'll see you in the next episode.